The Atlantis Deception: Why Everything You Think You Know is Wrong. In 2011, a Google Earth user spotted something impossible off the coast of Africa. Perfectly straight lines, grid patterns, structures spanning miles across the ocean floor. The internet exploded. "We found Atlantis," they said. Google had to issue a statement. But here's what nobody tells you. They might have been looking in the completely wrong place the entire time, and one man knew it 2,400 years ago. What if I told you that Atlantis wasn't mythology, that it was a real place, described in vivid, specific detail by one of history's greatest minds? And what if the reason we can't find it has nothing to do with ancient mysteries and everything to do with one catastrophic mistranslation that sent explorers searching in the wrong hemisphere for centuries? Because right now, underwater archaeologists are uncovering something that changes everything we thought we knew. Act 1. The original story. Let's start with what actually happened, because the true story is stranger than any movie version you've seen. 360 BC, Athens. A philosopher named Plato sits down to write two dialogues, Timaeus and Critias. He's not writing fiction for entertainment. He's presenting what he claims is an ancient historical account, passed down through generations. And he's absurdly specific about it. Here's where it gets interesting. Plato says this story came from Solon, Athens' greatest lawmaker, who heard it from Egyptian priests in the city of Sais around 580 BC. These priests, according to Plato, had records going back 9,000 years. Think about that. We're talking about knowledge allegedly preserved since 9600 BC, before Stonehenge, before the pyramids, before written language as we know it. The priests told Solon about a powerful civilization beyond the Pillars of Hercules, an island empire larger than Libya and Asia combined. They described its geography in meticulous detail. Concentric rings of water and land, a central mountain, fertile plains, abundant resources. They described its government, a confederation of kings, its military might, its eventual corruption. And then they described its end, a single day and night of catastrophic earthquakes and floods, the entire civilization vanishing beneath the waves. Now here's what most people miss. Plato wasn't some random storyteller. He was arguably the most influential philosopher in Western history. He founded the Academy in Athens. He taught Aristotle. His works shaped ethics, politics, metaphysics, and epistemology for millennia. This was not a man known for writing fantasy fiction. But there's a problem. A massive civilization-sized problem that nobody noticed for over 2,000 years. Act 2. The Fatal Error. In the 1600s, scholars started taking Plato's account literally and searching for Atlantis. They looked in the Mediterranean, the Atlantic, the Caribbean, Antarctica, everywhere. They found nothing, so the world decided Plato made it up. Atlantis became a metaphor, a parable, a cautionary tale about hubris and corruption. Case closed. Except one researcher refused to accept that conclusion. His name was K.T. Frost, and in 1909 he published something that would crack open the entire mystery. He suggested that Atlantis wasn't mythology at all. It was Minoan Crete, misremembered and distorted through centuries of oral tradition. Think about it. The Minoan civilization flourished from around 2700 to 1450 BC. They had advanced architecture, indoor plumbing, massive palaces, sophisticated art, extensive trade networks. They dominated the Aegean Sea. And then, suddenly, they collapsed. The timing of their collapse coincides almost perfectly with one of the largest volcanic eruptions in human history, Thera, modern-day Santorini, around 1600 BC. The eruption was catastrophic. It generated tsunamis that devastated coastal settlements. It buried the island under feet of volcanic ash. It likely triggered the Minoan civilization's decline. Sound familiar? But here's where Frost's theory gets really interesting and where a crucial mistake becomes visible. Plato said Atlantis existed 9,000 years before Solon's visit to Egypt. If we take that literally, we're looking at 9600 BC, deep in the Stone Age, long before any civilization could have built what Plato described. That's where everyone got stuck, until researchers started examining the numbers more carefully. Ancient Egyptians used different numbering systems than Greeks. When Egyptian priests gave numbers to Solon, they likely used their lunar calendar system or their numerical notation. When those numbers got translated into Greek, then Latin, then modern languages, something critical might have been lost. What if the Egyptian priests said 900 years, not 9,000? Suddenly, we're not looking at 9600 BC. We're looking at around 1600 BC, the exact time frame of the Thera eruption and Minoan collapse. 1 decimal point, 1 translation error, 2,000 years of confusion. Act 3. The Minoan Connection. Let me paint you a picture of what archaeologists have actually found on Crete and Santorini, because this is where the story shifts from speculation to physical evidence. In 1900, British archaeologist Arthur Evans began excavating Knossos on Crete. What he found stunned the world. A massive palace complex covering 150,000 square feet. Multiple stories, sophisticated drainage systems, vibrant frescoes depicting bull-leaping ceremonies, marine life, elegant people in colorful clothing, storage rooms containing enormous jars for oil and grain. This wasn't primitive, this was advanced, organized, wealthy. But the real game changer came in 1967, when archaeologists began systematically excavating Akrotiri on Santorini. What they found there was a Bronze Age Pompeii, an entire city frozen in time by volcanic ash. Multi-story buildings with internal staircases, sophisticated plumbing with terracotta pipes, hot and cold running water, toilets with drainage systems, pottery wheels, mills for grinding grain, and frescoes, absolutely stunning frescoes showing a prosperous maritime society engaged in trade and ceremony. One fresco, called the Ship Procession, shows a fleet of elaborate vessels moving between coastal settlements. These weren't crude boats, these were sophisticated ships with decorated prows, passengers, and ceremonial significance. Now compare this to Plato's description. He wrote about Atlantis having hot and cold springs, advanced engineering, concentric harbors for ships, a prosperous maritime empire engaged in extensive trade, a society that eventually grew corrupt and aggressive, attacking other nations. The Minoans had all of this. They traded extensively throughout the Mediterranean. Their ships reached Egypt, the Levant, possibly even further. They had significant cultural influence over surrounding regions, and historical evidence suggests they may have engaged in military expansions or raids. Then came Thera. The eruption was apocalyptic. Modern volcanologists estimate it was 4 times more powerful than Krakatoa, which killed over 36,000 people in 1883. The ash column likely reached the stratosphere. Tsunamis generated by the eruption would have been 35 to 150 feet high, traveling at speeds up to 200 miles per hour. Any coastal settlement in the Aegean would have been devastated. The Minoan fleet, their ports, their coastal palaces, all destroyed in a matter of hours. Act 4. The Contrary Evidence. But before we declare case closed, we need to talk about what doesn't fit. Because honest investigation requires looking at contradictions. Plato specifically said Atlantis was beyond the Pillars of Hercules, generally understood to be the Strait of Gibraltar. Crete and Santorini are in the Aegean, inside the Mediterranean. That's not beyond anything. That's geographically opposite. He described an island larger than Libya and Asia combined. Even accounting for ancient definitions of those regions, that's massive. Crete is big, but it's not that big, not even close. He described a rectangular plain behind the city, measuring 2,000 by 3,000 stadia. Converting ancient measurements is imprecise, but we're talking about a plain roughly 230 by 345 miles. That's enormous. Nothing in the Aegean matches that description. And then there's the timeline issue. Even if we accept the decimal point error theory, it's still a theory. We don't have the original Egyptian documents. We don't have Solon's notes. We have Plato's Greek text, written centuries after the alleged conversation. So some researchers started looking elsewhere, seriously elsewhere. In 2011, a German physicist named Rainer Kuhne proposed that the Rishat structure in Mauritania, a massive geological formation in the Sahara Desert, might be Atlantis. It has concentric circles, it's near the Atlantic coast, it shows signs of ancient water erosion. The problem? There's no archaeological evidence of any advanced civilization there. None. No pottery, no tools, no structures, nothing. Others have proposed locations in Antarctica, the Caribbean, even the North Sea. Each theory has problems. Each requires explaining away contradictions or making massive assumptions about ancient geography, sea levels, or geological changes. But here's what's fascinating. While researchers debated Atlantis, underwater archaeologists were finding something else entirely. Act 5. The Real Discoveries. Off the coast of Alexandria, Egypt, archaeologists have been mapping an ancient city submerged in the Mediterranean. Not Atlantis, but Heraklion, a major port that sank around 800 AD. They found massive statues, temples, harbors, ships, an entire city preserved underwater. Off Japan's coast lies the Yonaguni Monument, a massive underwater rock formation featuring what appear to be terraces, steps, and carved surfaces. Some researchers claim it's a man-made structure, possibly 10,000 years old. Others argue it's entirely natural, shaped by geological processes. Near Cuba, sonar imaging has detected geometric patterns on the ocean floor at depths of 2,000 feet. Some interpretations suggest structures, others attribute it to natural geology. Here's what these discoveries tell us. Ancient civilizations did exist in coastal areas that are now underwater. Sea levels have risen approximately 400 feet since the last ice age ended around 11,700 years ago. Entire coastlines, potentially harboring settlements, now lie beneath the waves. We know advanced civilizations existed earlier than we once thought. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, dated to around 9,600 BC, features massive stone pillars carved with sophisticated designs built by hunter-gatherers who supposedly lacked the organization for such projects. We know catastrophic events happened. The Younger Dryas hypothesis suggests that around 12,800 years ago, a cosmic impact or airburst caused rapid climate change, potentially contributing to megafauna extinctions and disrupting human populations. And we know that ancient peoples preserved historical memories. Flood myths appear in dozens of cultures worldwide: Sumerian, Hebrew, Greek, Hindu, Chinese, Native American. While not proof of Atlantis, these myths suggest that ancient peoples experienced and remembered catastrophic flooding events. So what's the truth? Act 6. The Synthesis. Here's what we can say with confidence, separating fact from speculation. Fact: Plato wrote a detailed account claiming to describe a real historical event. His description includes specific geographic, political, and architectural details. Fact: the Minoan civilization was advanced, maritime, and collapsed suddenly around 1600 BC, coinciding with the catastrophic Thera eruption. Fact: the parallels between Plato's description and Minoan civilization are striking. Advanced architecture, maritime power, concentric harbor design, sudden catastrophic destruction. Fact: Plato's chronology doesn't work for the Stone Age. 9,600 BC is too early for the civilization he described. Fact: a translation error regarding the timeline is plausible but unproven. Here's what remains speculation: whether Plato intended his account as literal history or philosophical allegory, whether the Egyptian priests had actual records or were recounting distorted legends, whether the geographic details are accurate, mistranslated, or deliberately altered for Plato's philosophical purposes. The most parsimonious explanation, the one requiring the fewest assumptions, is this: Plato heard a distorted account of the Minoan civilization's catastrophic end and incorporated it into his philosophical works, possibly altering details to serve his ethical arguments about hubris and divine punishment. But that explanation doesn't account for everything. It doesn't explain the geographic specificity. It doesn't explain why Plato insisted, in multiple dialogues, that the story was true. It doesn't explain why he went silent, leaving Critias unfinished, ending mid-sentence. Act 7. The bigger question. The search for Atlantis has consumed enormous resources, fueled countless expeditions, inspired books, documentaries, and Hollywood films. Why? Because Atlantis represents something deeper than archaeological curiosity. It represents the possibility that we've lost something, that ancient peoples achieved more than we give them credit for, that history isn't a simple march from primitive to advanced, but something messier, with rises and falls, civilizations that flourished and vanished. Every major ancient civilization has stories of a golden age, a paradise lost. The Greeks had Atlantis, the Sumerians had Dilmun, the Hebrews had Eden, the Hindus had Kumari Kandam, supposedly submerged off southern India. Are these memories of real places? Metaphors for lost innocence? Both? What we're really asking when we search for Atlantis is, what have we forgotten? What did ancient peoples know that we've lost? And could it happen to us? Because here's the uncomfortable truth: civilizations do collapse. The Bronze Age collapse around 1200 BC saw multiple advanced civilizations fall within decades. The Mayans abandoned their cities. Rome fell. The Indus Valley civilization vanished. In each case, sophisticated societies with architecture, writing, trade networks, and governance simply ended. Knowledge was lost, technologies forgotten. In some cases, literacy itself disappeared for centuries. We're not immune. Climate change, natural disasters, pandemics, nuclear weapons all pose existential risks. The hubris that Plato warned against, the belief that our power makes us invulnerable, remains relevant. Maybe that's the real message of Atlantis. Not that a specific city sank, but that greatness is fragile, that civilization is not inevitable, that we should learn from history or be condemned to repeat it. Conclusion. So did Atlantis exist? If you're asking whether a massive island empire beyond Gibraltar sank in a day around 9600 BC, almost certainly not. There's no geological evidence for such an event, no archaeological artifacts, no physical trace. If you're asking whether Plato based his account on a real civilization's catastrophic end, probably yes. The Minoan collapse fits too many details to be coincidence. The timing works with a translation error. The archaeological evidence is substantial. If you're asking whether advanced civilizations existed in now submerged coastal areas lost to rising seas and catastrophic events, absolutely. We're finding them. We'll find more. But here's what matters. The search for Atlantis has driven innovation in underwater archaeology, sonar technology, geological analysis, and ancient linguistics. It's pushed researchers to question assumptions, explore new areas, and take ancient accounts seriously as potential historical sources. The story of Atlantis is ultimately a story about memory, loss, and the human need to understand our past. It's about the fine line between history and myth, and how quickly one becomes the other. Plato ended Critias mid-sentence. We don't know why. Perhaps he died. Perhaps he abandoned the project. Perhaps he realized that some stories are more powerful unfinished, leaving us to wonder, to search, to keep asking questions. The waters still hold secrets, the earth still holds answers, and somewhere between the facts we've found and the mysteries that remain lies the truth about what really happened all those centuries ago. The search continues, the ocean keeps its secrets, and Atlantis, whatever it was, remains both a warning and a wonder. Thanks for watching.